I am Keisha, 32 years old, and until last Tuesday, I thought I was walking into a celebration. My husband had texted me to hurry home because he had wonderful news. I walked through the door carrying our 1-year-old daughter, only to find his entire family waiting in dead silence. He dropped a piece of paper on the coffee table and announced to the room that she was not his child. His mother immediately demanded I pack my things and get out, calling me a cheat and a low-level bookkeeper. What they did not know was that the man walking up the driveway behind me was about to shatter their entire reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against a toxic family. The sweltering Georgia heat was suffocating that afternoon as I pulled my car into the sweeping driveway of our home in Buckhead. Atlanta summers always carried a heavy humidity, but my mood was surprisingly light. Malik, my husband of 4 years and a newly minted corporate vice president, had sent me a text just an hour earlier. "Come home, we have wonderful news." I had spent the morning reviewing quarterly reports for my clients, or at least that is what Malik believed I was doing. For our entire relationship, I had maintained the facade of being a simple, struggling freelance bookkeeper who took on small local clients to bring in a little extra grocery money. I let him pay the visible bills. I let him bask in his role as the primary provider. I let his family believe they had graciously welcomed a woman of lower status into their prestigious circle. I unbuckled Zuri from her car seat, balancing her on my hip as she giggled and tugged at my earrings. Walking up the brick pathway to the heavy oak front doors, I imagined a promotion celebration. Malik had been gunning for a massive merger at his firm, something that would cement his status in the corporate world. I pushed the front door open, the cool air conditioning washing over my skin, and stepped into the grand foyer with a smile on my face. That smile vanished the second I walked into the formal living room. There were no balloons. There was no champagne. Instead, the room felt like a tribunal. Malik was standing by the fireplace, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression a mask of cold fury. Seated on the custom velvet sofa was his mother, Vivian. She was dressed as if she were heading to a society luncheon, wearing a tailored cream suit and her signature string of imported pearls. To her right sat Malik's older brother, Terrence, who refused to meet my eyes, and Terrence's white wife, Chloe, who wore an expression of practiced theatrical pity. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft babble of Zuri pointing a chubby finger at her father. Malik did not look at his daughter. He did not step forward to greet me. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a soft, dismissive slap. "She is not my child," Malik said. His voice was loud, carrying through the high ceilings of the room designed to perform for his audience. I stood frozen for a fraction of a second, shifting Zuri's weight on my hip. Before I could even process the absurdity of his statement, Vivian was on her feet. She smoothed the front of her silk blouse, her face contorting with a vicious satisfaction she had been hiding for 4 years. "I told him, Keisha." Vivian's voice rang out sharp and dripping with absolute disdain. "I knew a low-level freelance bookkeeper was not good enough for a vice president. You saw my son climbing the corporate ladder and you trapped him. You thought a baby would secure your place in this family, and now the DNA proves you are a cheat. Get out of my son's house and take that illegitimate baby with you." She pointed a manicured finger toward the front door. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. For years, Vivian had made her elitism known through microaggressions. She would constantly remind me how much Malik had sacrificed to marry someone without a proper corporate pedigree. She would buy me cheap, insulting gifts for the holidays, while showering Chloe with designer handbags, loudly praising Chloe's background while treating my very existence as a charitable project her son had taken on. Now the mask was completely off. She was relishing this moment, bathing in the false glory of finally proving that I was the trash she always claimed I was. Malik stood tall, puffing his chest out, playing the role of the deeply wounded, honorable man who had been taken advantage of by a scheming woman. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh, placing a comforting hand on Vivian's shoulder, as if to steady the older woman through this terrible ordeal. They expected me to break down. They expected me to fall to my knees, to cry, to beg for forgiveness, or demand a second test. They expected the powerless, financially dependent woman they thought I was to panic at the prospect of being thrown out onto the streets of Atlanta with nothing. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I felt a cold, absolute calm wash over me. I walked slowly over to the plush playpen in the corner of the room and gently set Zuri down, handing her a stuffed elephant to keep her occupied. Once she was safe and distracted, I turned my attention back to the tribunal. I walked to the glass coffee table, my heels clicking methodically against the hardwood floor. I picked up the crumpled piece of paper. It was printed on what looked like official medical letterhead. There were barcodes, scientific jargon, and a giant red stamp at the bottom that read 0% probability of paternity. I scanned the document, my eyes automatically catching details that a normal person might miss. But I was not a normal person. I was not a struggling bookkeeper. I was the stealth founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Forensics, a firm that specialized in uncovering federal corporate fraud. Finding the flaw in forged documents was literally how I made my fortune. I looked at the clinic logo at the top left corner. I looked at the signature of the supposed medical director at the bottom. And then standing in the middle of that hostile room, I threw my head back and laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed off the walls. Vivian recoiled as if I had struck her. Malik's confident posture faltered, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Malik," I said, tossing the paper back onto the glass table. "You could not even pay for a premium forgery." His face flushed a deep, dark red. "I do not know what kind of psychological game you are playing, Keisha, but the results are right there in black and white." I took a step closer to him, my voice dropping to a low, lethal timbre. "The clinic you used for this fake letter is called Peachtree Diagnostics. You pulled their logo off a generic Google search. I know this because my firm audited them. That clinic was shut down by the state of Georgia for massive medical malpractice and insurance fraud 3 years ago. The doctor whose signature you forged on the bottom of that page has been sitting in a federal penitentiary since 2023. The color completely drained from Malik's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vivian stopped smoothing her skirt, her hand freezing mid-air. Terrence finally looked up from the floor, his eyes darting between me and his brother. Chloe's theatrical expression of pity vanished, replaced by genuine confusion. "You actually thought I would look at a piece of paper and just walk out of my own life?" I continued, my gaze fixed intensely on my husband. "You thought I would just take my daughter and vanish because you orchestrated this cheap, pathetic little theater production. You do not even know who you are married to." Malik tried to recover, puffing his chest out again, his voice rising in volume to mask his sudden panic. "You are delusional. You are crazy. This is exactly why I am divorcing you. You are having a mental breakdown because you got caught." Before he could spin his narrative any further, before Vivian could open her mouth to unleash another tirade about my supposed lack of class, a heavy sound interrupted them. The heavy oak front door swung open. Footsteps echoed in the foyer, deliberate and unhurried. A man stepped into the entryway where the living room met the hall. He was impeccably dressed in a sharp-tailored navy suit, carrying a thick leather-bound folder under his arm. His silver hair was perfectly combed and his posture radiated absolute authority. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at Chloe or Terrence. He did not even look at me. He stopped at the edge of the living room rug, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, and stared dead at Malik. He held a thick black leather folder in his right hand. The gold-embossed logo of Apex Financial caught the light from the crystal chandelier overhead. Malik took a single unsteady step backward, his broad shoulders suddenly slumping as the confident corporate facade evaporated. "Malik," the man said, his voice carrying the calm, lethal authority of someone who held absolute power in the room. "I am Mr. Harrison, lead federal auditor for Apex Financial." The name alone sent a visible tremor through my husband. I stood perfectly still, holding Zuri comfortably against my hip, watching the blood drain completely from Malik's face. "I have one question for you," Mr. Harrison continued, stepping further into the foyer and flipping open the leather folder. "Why did you wire exactly $500,000 of stolen company funds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, and then use a forged DNA test to trigger a fault-based divorce clause to cover your tracks?" The room plunged into a suffocating silence. The only sound was Zuri happily smacking her stuffed elephant against my shoulder. Malik opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted wildly from the open folder in Mr. Harrison's hands to my perfectly calm face. He was suffocating on his own arrogance. Suddenly, Vivian shattered the quiet. She leaped up from the velvet sofa, her imported pearls clicking sharply against her chest. "This is a stunt!" Vivian shrieked, her voice shrill and frantic as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "I knew you were desperate, Keisha, but this is a new low. You hired a cheap actor to come in here and slander my son. You are a low-level bookkeeper. You do not even make enough money to afford a real lawyer, let alone someone who knows anything about offshore accounts. Get out of my house before I call the authorities." Mr. Harrison did not flinch. He slowly closed the leather folder, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, and turned his gaze to Vivian. A cold, calculating smirk touched the corners of his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, his tone dripping with professional condescension. "She did not hire me. I am a salaried executive at Apex Financial. And she is my boss. She owns the firm your son just robbed." Vivian staggered backward, as if she had been physically struck, her knees hitting the edge of the sofa. She collapsed onto the cushions, her mouth hanging open. Terrence stared at me, his eyes wide with shock, finally seeing the woman his family had underestimated for 4 years. But Malik refused to surrender. Cornered men rarely do. He scrambled for a lifeline, falling back on the oldest trick in his manipulative playbook. He tried to gaslight the entire room. "She is lying," Malik yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed at me, his face twisted in a mask of manufactured panic. "Look at her. She is mentally unstable. She has been having a severe psychological breakdown since Zuri was born. This is postpartum psychosis. She stole company letterhead and paid this man to ruin my career because she knows I am leaving her." He turned wildly to his older brother. "Terrence, do not just stand there. Grab her arm. Physically remove her from my house before she hurts the baby. She is out of her mind." Terrence hesitated, his muscles tensing clearly, torn between his brother's frantic orders and the chilling reality of Mr. Harrison standing in the doorway. Before Terrence could make a move, his wife Chloe stepped directly into the center of the room. Chloe raised both hands in a placating surrender-like gesture. She took a slow, deliberate step toward me, wearing a look of deep, practiced empathy. "Keisha, sweetie." Chloe began, dropping her pitch into a soft, condescending therapy voice that she loved to use whenever she wanted to sound enlightened. "I am speaking to you woman to woman right now. As a woman of color, I know you carry a deep burden of generational trauma. The world is so hard on you, and it is completely understandable that you are projecting your deepest insecurities onto Malik to protect yourself. But this environment is toxic for the child." Chloe took another slow step forward, reaching a hand out as if trying to coax a frightened animal. "Let us just pack Zuri's things. Terrence and I will drive you to a women's shelter downtown. They have wonderful resources for mothers in crisis. We will get you the psychiatric help you need, so Malik can heal his peace and figure out this misunderstanding." I stared at my white sister-in-law, marveling at her absolute audacity. She was weaponizing social justice buzzwords to smoothly evict me from my own life, all while painting my husband as the true victim. I adjusted Zuri on my hip, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Generational trauma," I said, my voice echoing clearly against the high ceilings. Chloe dropped the fake allyship. "You are not protecting my mental health, and you certainly do not care about my daughter. You are just trying to get me out of this house quickly, so Terrence does not look too closely at his own financial statements. The ones you have been draining to pay off your brother's 3 driving under the influence settlements in Ohio, so he would not serve federal prison time." Chloe stopped dead in her tracks. The fake, soothing smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer terror. "What are you talking about?" Terrence asked, stepping around the coffee table, his brow furrowing as he looked at his wife. I kept my eyes locked on Chloe, watching her breathe heavily. "I am talking about the fact that your wife has been systematically funneling money out of your trust fund for the last 14 months. She told you that money was going toward a real estate venture in the suburbs. But I am a forensic accountant, Chloe. I follow the money." Terrence snapped his head toward Chloe. His jaw tightened so hard I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. "What settlements?" Chloe. Terrence demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You told me your brother was expanding his contracting business. You told me that money was an investment. Chloe opened her mouth, stammering, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. Terrence, baby, I can explain. It was a temporary loan. I was going to put the money back before the end of the fiscal year. Terrence let out a disgusted shout, turning his back on her and pacing to the far side of the room, igniting a massive explosive argument between the two of them that completely derailed Malik's attempt to use them against me. Seeing her family crumbling in real time, Vivian completely lost what was left of her composure. She leaped up from the sofa again, her face contorted with unhinged rage. She swept her arm across the side table, accidentally knocking over a heavy imported crystal vase she had brought over months ago to elevate my supposedly tacky living room. The vase shattered violently across the hardwood floor, sending shards of glass flying. "I am calling the police!" Vivian screamed, spit flying from her lips as she pulled her smartphone from her designer purse. "You are not going to stand in my son's house and destroy my family with your filthy lies. I will have you arrested for trespassing and defamation. You will leave this property in handcuffs." I did not blink. "Put it on speaker, Vivian. I would love to hear what dispatch has to say." I shifted Zuri to my left arm, reached into my sleek leather diaper bag with my right hand, and pulled out a thick stack of folded, notarized documents. I tossed the papers onto the glass coffee table right on top of Malik's forged DNA test. "Malik does not own this house," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of Chloe's sobbing and Terrence's shouting. "A blind, limited liability company owns this house. I set up that firm 2 years before I ever let your son put a ring on my finger. I am the sole proprietor. The only thing Malik pays for in this entire residence is the monthly internet bill." Malik stared at the documents on the table, his chest heaving. His eyes darted to the front door where Mr. Harrison was still standing, completely blocking the exit. Malik was a man who survived entirely on appearances, on the illusion of control. And right now, every single illusion he had crafted was burning to the ground. Desperate to maintain some shred of his corporate authority, Malik pulled out his own phone and quickly dialed 911. He was banking on his polished executive voice to win over whatever officers arrived. He wanted to spin the narrative before I could show them the paperwork. "Yes, I need officers at my residence immediately," Malik said smoothly into the phone, turning away from me to stare out the front windows. "I have a hostile intruder refusing to leave the premises. She is causing a massive disturbance and creating an unsafe environment for my child. Yes, I will wait outside for the squad car." He hung up the phone, turning back to me with a smug, victorious sneer. "You overplayed your hand, Keisha. You think because you have some secret company, you can just humiliate me in front of my mother. The police are on their way. You are going to learn what happens when you try to embarrass a man like me." I simply smiled, reaching down to grab a soft blanket from the playpen to wrap around Zuri's shoulders. "I am not trying to embarrass you, Malik," I replied softly, listening to the faint, growing wail of police sirens echoing down the affluent Buckhead streets. "I am simply taking out the trash." The wail of the police sirens sliced through the heavy tension in my living room, growing louder until the flashing red and blue lights pulsed through the sheer curtains. The frantic strobe illuminated the shattered crystal of Vivian's broken vase scattered across my hardwood floor. Terrence was still backing Chloe toward the hallway, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he demanded to know exactly how much of his inheritance she had funneled to her brother in Ohio to pay off his driving under the influence charges. Chloe was weeping heavy theatrical sobs, begging him to understand that she just wanted to be a supportive sister. I watched her crocodile tears fall completely flat. Terrence was not buying the victim act anymore. He grabbed his coat, gave her one final look of absolute disgust, and walked out the side door, leaving her standing there clutching her designer bag in shock. Heavy knocking pounded on the front door. Malik quickly straightened his suit jacket, ran a hand over his hair, and forced his face into a mask of distressed patience. He was preparing to play the victimized corporate executive. He pulled the door open, revealing 2 police officers standing on the porch. Malik instantly stepped into their space, lowering his voice into a smooth, collaborative tone designed to establish immediate rapport. He gestured toward me with a look of manufactured pity. He told the officers that his wife was having a severe psychological episode. He claimed I broke into his home, stole company documents, and was currently holding his daughter hostage in a state of delusion. He asked them to please escort me off his property so he could secure the safety of his child. Vivian chimed in right on cue. She stepped behind her son, pressing a hand to her chest, playing the exhausted, respectable matriarch. She told the officers that I had always been unstable, a low-income freelancer who swindled her successful son, and now I was having a total break from reality. The lead officer, a tall, no-nonsense man, stepped past them and approached me carefully. He assessed the situation. He saw the shattered glass on the floor courtesy of Vivian. He saw me standing perfectly still, my posture relaxed, holding a quietly babbling Zuri in my arms. I did not match the description of a hysterical intruder. I did not raise my voice. I looked the officer dead in the eye and smiled politely. I told the officer there had been a misunderstanding. I pointed to the glass coffee table, where the notarized document sat. I asked him to please review the property deed and the articles of organization attached to it. The officer picked up the heavy stack of papers. Malik scoffed loudly, telling the officer not to bother with fake documents drawn up by a crazy woman. The officer read the first page, his brow furrowing. He read the second page. He pulled out his radio and asked dispatch to run the address and the limited liability company listed on the deed. The silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating. Vivian glared at me, tapping her foot, waiting for my inevitable arrest. Mr. Harrison stood silently by the hallway, watching the corporate fraudster dig his own grave. The radio crackled. Dispatch confirmed the property was wholly owned by the limited liability company. I calmly pulled my Georgia driver's license from my pocket and handed it to the officer, along with the state registry document proving I was the sole managing member of that exact company. The officer handed my identification back. He turned slowly to face my husband. "Sir," the officer said, his tone completely shifting from collaborative to authoritative. "She is the legal property owner. You have no legal standing to force her out of this residence. In fact, since she is the sole proprietor, if she wants you gone, you are technically trespassing." Malik looked like all the air had been punched out of his lungs. He stammered, pointing at me, claiming this was a marital home and he had marital rights. He demanded the officers recognize his residency. I shifted Zuri to my other hip and looked at my husband with absolute zero sympathy. I reminded him of the ironclad prenuptial agreement he practically forced me to sign 4 years ago to protect his precious corporate assets from the lowly bookkeeper. I reminded him that Section 4 of his own contract clearly stated that any property held in a prior limited liability company remained the sole untouchable property of the owner, regardless of marriage. And as for his residency rights, I pointed out that a fault-based divorce clause was just triggered by his own hand when he presented a forged DNA test claiming infidelity. The lead officer shook his head, clearly exhausted by Malik's arrogance. He rested his hand on his duty belt and gave Malik a hard stare. "I am not a family court judge," the officer said. "But I know who owns this house. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack a bag and vacate the premises, or I will arrest you for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Vivian let out a high-pitched shriek. She completely lost her mind, stomping her feet and screaming about her social standing in Atlanta, shouting that the officers did not know who they were dealing with. She threatened to have their badges. She threatened to call the mayor. The second officer took a step toward her and firmly suggested she wait outside before she got cited for disorderly conduct. Muttering furious, venomous insults under her breath, Vivian grabbed her designer purse and stormed out the front door, her heels clicking aggressively down the driveway. Chloe followed shortly after, sobbing into her phone, completely ignored by everyone. Malik was left standing alone in the living room. His grand plan had completely collapsed. He glared at me with a hatred so pure it practically burned the air between us. He turned and sprinted up the curved staircase, throwing open closet doors and violently pulling down a suitcase. I listened to the frantic sounds of him throwing clothes into a bag. 10 minutes later, he descended the stairs, his face a mask of bitter, humiliated rage. He stopped at the front door, right where Mr. Harrison was still standing like a silent sentinel of his impending corporate doom. Malik turned back to me one last time. "You think you won," he spit out, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can embarrass me and take my house. I am going to drain every single account we have. I am calling my bank right now and freezing all the assets. By tomorrow morning, you will not have a dime to your name. You will be begging me for grocery money. I looked at him with a serene, unbothered smile. Do what you have to do, Malik. He turned and walked out the door, the police officers following close behind to ensure he left the property. The heavy oak door swung shut, the lock clicking into place. I stood in the grand foyer of my empty house listening to the sound of his car tires screeching down the driveway. I walked over to the sofa and placed Zuri down in her playpen. I walked to the front door and threw the deadbolt. I walked back to the coffee table and retrieved the forged DNA test, sliding it neatly into a folder for my divorce attorney. Malik thought he was delivering a fatal blow by freezing our joint checking account. He had no idea that account only contained $2,400. He had no idea that behind the firewall of my fake freelance identity, I controlled an 8-figure financial portfolio. He had no idea that his entire life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. I pulled my secure encrypted laptop from my bag and set it on the dining table. I typed in my credentials and bypassed the fake desktop environment I had maintained for years. The screen flashed black, then loaded into the secure server network of Apex Financial Forensics. Mr. Harrison walked into the dining room smoothing his tie. He looked at me with a sharp professional nod. Excellent work, Madam Chief Executive Officer. The trap is perfectly set. I pulled up the offshore banking traces my team had mapped out over the last 48 hours. Malik had stolen $500,000 from our firm planning to marry his pregnant subordinate and tried to throw me out on the street to cover his tracks. I smiled, feeling a cold, calculating power settle deep in my chest. The eviction was just the appetizer. The real war had just begun. Mr. Harrison leaned over my shoulder as the screen illuminated the dining room. Right on schedule, a red notification banner flashed across my secure dashboard. Malik had executed the freeze on our joint checking account. I clicked on the transaction details. He had drained exactly $2,421, leaving a zero balance, fully believing he had just severed my only financial lifeline. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Mr. Harrison tapped the edge of the table. He really thinks you are going to be begging for grocery money by sunrise. I switched tabs, bypassing the encrypted firewall that guarded my actual identity. The screen populated with my real asset portfolio. 8 figures diversified across mutual funds, commercial real estate, and municipal bonds, all safely locked inside corporate structures Malik did not even know existed. I authorized Harrison to finalize the federal audit report. Malik thought he was playing chess, but he was not even on the board. Early the next morning, I stepped out of the private elevator into the penthouse suite of Sterling and Associates. Ms. Sterling was a shark in a tailored burgundy suit renowned across Atlanta as the most ruthless divorce attorney money could buy. She did not deal in emotions. She dealt in total annihilation. I sat in one of the plush leather chairs opposite her massive desk, while Zuri slept peacefully in her stroller beside me. Ms. Sterling slid a copy of Malik's prenup across the polished mahogany. She tapped a manicured fingernail against Section 7. "How was banking entirely on the fault-based clause," Ms. Sterling said, her voice sharp and analytical. "If he could prove infidelity on your part, the contract stipulates he retains 100% of all marital assets and pays zero spousal support." I leaned forward. But why the rush? Why forge a DNA test from a disgraced clinic instead of just filing for a standard divorce? "Because he is completely out of time," she replied, pulling up a financial timeline on her monitor. "Malik's quarterly executive review at his firm is scheduled for this coming Friday. The $500,000 he embezzled from your company needs to be replaced before their internal accounting software flags the missing capital. He was planning to use the marital assets he stripped from you to quietly cover his tracks, get his massive executive bonus, and walk away clean. How is going to leave me and his own daughter homeless to save his corporate skin? We will be filing a countersuit before noon," Ms. Sterling stated, sliding a pen toward me. "We are citing fraud, financial abuse, and criminal forgery. By the time I am done with him, he will not even own the lint in his pockets." I left the law firm feeling a potent surge of adrenaline. I stopped at an upscale coffee shop in Buckhead to grab a matcha latte before heading home. I had barely taken my first sip when a frantic hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned around to find Chloe. My sister-in-law looked nothing like the polished, condescending woman who had tried to white savior me out of my own house yesterday. Her designer mascara was smudged, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were wide with sheer panic. "Keisha, please," Chloe gasped, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me uninvited. "You have to listen to me." Terrence locked me out of the house. He froze my credit cards. He is talking to his lawyers right now. I took a slow sip of my drink, maintaining absolute eye contact. I fail to see how any of that is my problem, Chloe. She leaned across the small cafe table, dropping the desperate act, and switching instantly to hostility. "You cannot tell his lawyers about the trust fund money. If you testify about the Ohio settlements, Terrence will press charges for embezzlement. I will go to jail." I set my cup down. "You stole from your husband to pay off your brother's multiple drunk driving charges because you thought you were untouchable. You thought you could stand in my living room, weaponize my race, and pretend to care about my generational trauma while actively trying to make me homeless. Now you want my silence." Chloe's face hardened, the last shred of her fake allyship burning away. She gripped the edge of the table, her voice dropping to a vicious hiss. "If you do not keep your mouth shut, I will go to every society blog in Atlanta. I will tell them you went crazy. I will paint you as an angry, aggressive, bitter woman who ruined Malik's career out of jealousy. I know bloggers who will ruin your reputation before dinner." I did not flinch. I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single finger straight up. Chloe frowned, following my gaze to the ceiling. A high-definition security camera was pointed directly at our table, a blinking green light indicating it was actively recording audio and video. "Extortion and blackmail are felonies in the state of Georgia." "Chloe," I said softly, "and you just threatened a corporate chief executive officer on camera. If you are not out of my sight in 5 seconds, I am calling my security team to hold you until the police arrive." Chloe turned completely white. She scrambled out of her chair, nearly knocking it over, and practically ran out the front door of the cafe. As I watched her flee down the sidewalk, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Keisha, it is Vanessa. Malik lied to me too. He said he was a billionaire. I found out he is completely broke, and I have the flash drive with his real bank statements. Meet me tonight." I stared at the screen. Vanessa. The name clicked immediately. She was a junior account manager at Malik's firm. She was his subordinate, the woman he was planning to replace me with. I texted back a single address and a time. At 8 o'clock that evening, I pulled my SUV into a dimly lit multi-level parking garage in downtown Atlanta. The concrete structure was mostly empty, the echoing sound of tires amplifying the tension. I parked on the 4th floor, exactly where I told her to meet me. A few minutes later, a compact sedan pulled up beside me. A young woman stepped out, pulling her coat tightly around her shoulders. She was visibly pregnant. I rolled down my window. Vanessa approached my car, her hands shaking. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the empty garage as if Malik might jump out from behind a concrete pillar. "He told me he was leaving a toxic marriage," Vanessa said, her voice trembling as she stood by my car door. "He told me he was independently wealthy and that we were going to buy a house in Sandy Springs before the baby arrived. But I saw his laptop open at the office today. I saw the eviction notices. I saw the legal threats from the offshore accounts. He does not have anything." "He has a lot of audacity," I replied coldly. "Hand it over." Vanessa reached into her pocket and pulled out a silver flash drive. She handed it through the window. "I just want out," she whispered. "I do not want any part of whatever federal trouble he is in." I took the drive. "You did the right thing, Vanessa. Disappear and do not answer his calls." She practically sprinted back to her car and sped off into the night. I sat alone in the quiet garage, the glow of my dashboard illuminating the interior of my car. I pulled my laptop from the passenger seat, booted it up, and inserted the flash drive. The files populated instantly. Spreadsheets, wire transfer receipts, encrypted email logs. Malik had been sloppy, keeping everything in a hidden desktop folder labeled under a fake client name. I opened the offshore account registry, the exact Cayman Islands account, where he had deposited the stolen $500,000 from my firm. I needed to verify the routing numbers for Mr. Harrison. But as I scrolled past the routing data, my eyes locked onto the primary account holder information. The offshore account was not in Malik's name. The signature on the bottom of the international banking agreement belonged to Vivian. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a steady, lethal rhythm against my ribs. Malik had not just stolen corporate funds. He had forged his own mother's signature to open the offshore accounts. He had deliberately placed Vivian as the primary beneficiary of the stolen money. If the federal authorities ever traced the missing funds, the paper trail would bypass Malik completely and point directly to his social climbing status-obsessed mother. He was planning to use his own mother as the federal fall guy to save himself from prison. I closed the laptop, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Malik thought he was a mastermind. He thought he was untouchable. He had just handed me the match to burn his entire empire to ash, and I was going to make sure he watched it burn in front of the entire city. The notification glowed bright red across my encrypted dashboard. Malik had done exactly what I knew he would do. He executed a total freeze and transfer on our joint checking account. I clicked on the transaction history, watching the digital footprint of his petty revenge unfold in real time. He had drained exactly $2,421. It was every single cent in that account, leaving a zero balance. In his mind, he had just severed my only financial lifeline. I truly believed he had left me destitute, holding a baby in a house I could not afford to power or feed us in. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle that echoed in the empty dining room. Mr. Harrison tapped his pen against the edge of the mahogany table. He really thinks you are going to be begging for grocery money by sunrise, does he not? I switched tabs, completely bypassing the encrypted firewall that guarded my actual identity. The screen instantly populated with my real asset portfolio. 8 figures meticulously diversified across mutual funds, commercial real estate holdings, and municipal bonds, all safely locked inside blind corporate structures Malik did not even know existed. I initiated a total system lockdown, activating biometric authentications and moving the liquid assets into secondary offshore trusts that not even a federal judge could easily unseal without my direct authorization. I nodded to Mr. Harrison, granting him the final security clearance to finalize the federal audit report on my husband. Malik thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess, but he did not even realize he was not on the board. He had just handed my divorce attorney documented proof of financial abuse. Early the next morning, I stepped out of the private elevator into the penthouse suite of Sterling and Associates. Ms. Sterling was an absolute shark in a tailored burgundy suit, renowned across Atlanta, high society, as the most ruthless divorce attorney money could buy. She did not deal in emotions, tears, or amicable separations. She dealt in total annihilation. I sat in one of the plush leather chairs opposite her massive glass desk, while Zuri slept peacefully in her stroller beside me. Ms. Sterling slid a copy of Malik's prenuptial agreement across the polished desk. She tapped a manicured fingernail against Section 7, highlighting a densely worded paragraph. "I was banking entirely on this fault-based clause," Ms. Sterling said, her voice sharp and analytical. "If he could prove infidelity on your part, the contract stipulates he retains 100% of all marital assets and pays zero spousal support. He gets the house, the cars, the investments, everything." I leaned forward, studying the highlighted text. But why the sudden rush? Why forge a DNA test from a disgraced clinic instead of just filing for a standard divorce and fighting it out in court over the next year? "Because he is completely out of time," she replied, pulling up a financial timeline on her sleek computer monitor. I cross-referenced the audit report your firm generated with his corporate calendar. Malik's quarterly executive review at his firm is scheduled for this coming Friday. The $500,000 he embezzled from your company needs to be replaced before their internal accounting software flags the missing capital during the audit. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. He was planning to use the marital assets he stripped from you to quietly cover his tracks. Ms. Sterling continued. He sells the assets, replaces the stolen funds, gets his massive executive bonus for the quarter, and walks away completely clean. I sat back in the leather chair, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. He was going to leave me and his own daughter completely homeless just to save his corporate skin. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was a desperate, panicked man backed into a corner by his own greed. "We will be filing a countersuit before noon," Ms. Sterling stated, sliding a heavy gold-plated pen toward me. We are citing fraud, financial abuse, and criminal forgery. By the time I am done with him, he will not even own the lint in his pockets. I signed the documents, leaving the law firm feeling a potent surge of adrenaline. I decided to stop at an upscale coffee shop in Buckhead to grab a matcha latte before heading home to relieve the nanny. I had just found a quiet corner table and barely taken my first sip when a frantic hand grabbed my shoulder, spilling hot green tea onto the table. I turned around to find Chloe. My sister-in-law looked absolutely nothing like the polished, condescending woman who had tried to white savior me out of my own house yesterday. Her expensive designer mascara was smudged under her eyes. Her blonde hair was a messy knot and her face was pale with sheer panic. "Keisha, please!" Chloe gasped, pulling out the chair across from me and sitting down entirely uninvited. "You have to listen to me. Terrence locked me out of the house last night. He froze all my credit cards. He is talking to his lawyers right now. You have to call him and tell him you made a mistake." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, maintaining absolute eye contact. "I fail to see how any of that is my problem, Chloe." She leaned aggressively across the small cafe table. She dropped the desperate pleading act, and her demeanor switched instantly to vicious hostility. "You cannot tell his lawyers about the trust fund money. If you testify about the Ohio settlements and show them the financial trail, Terrence will press charges for embezzlement. I will go to jail." I set my cup down, the ceramic clinking sharply against the saucer. "You stole from your husband to pay off your brother's multiple drunk driving charges because you thought you were untouchable. You thought you could stand in my living room, weaponize my race, and pretend to care about my generational trauma while actively trying to manipulate me into a homeless shelter. Now you want my silence to save yourself." Chloe's face hardened, the very last shred of her fake allyship burning away into pure spite. She gripped the edge of the small table, her knuckles turning white, and her voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "If you do not keep your mouth shut and fix this with Terrence, I will go to every society blog in Atlanta. I will tell them you went crazy. I will paint you as an angry, aggressive, bitter black woman who ruined Malik's career out of pure jealousy because he wanted a divorce. I know bloggers who will completely destroy your reputation before dinner." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or react to the blatant racist trope she was threatening to use against me. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out a silk tissue, and wiped the spilled matcha from the table. Then I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single finger straight up toward the ceiling. Chloe frowned, following my gaze upward. Right above our table, a high-definition security camera was pointed directly at us, a blinking green light indicating it was actively recording both audio and high-resolution video. "Extortion and blackmail are felonies in the state of Georgia." "Chloe," I said softly, my voice perfectly level. "And you just threatened a corporate chief executive officer on camera. If you are not out of my sight in exactly 5 seconds, I am calling my personal security team to hold you right here until the Atlanta police arrive." Chloe turned completely white. The color drained from her face so fast she looked ill. She scrambled backward out of her chair, nearly knocking it over, and practically ran out the front glass doors of the cafe, her heels stumbling on the pavement. As I watched her flee down the sidewalk in absolute terror, my phone vibrated intensely in my purse. I pulled it out and unlocked the screen. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize, but the preview text made my blood run cold. "Keisha, it is Vanessa. Malik lied to me too. He said he was a billionaire. I found out he is completely broke, and I have the flash drive with his real bank statements. Meet me tonight." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the words of the text message burning themselves into my memory. "Keisha, it is Vanessa. Malik lied to me too. He said he was a billionaire. I found out he is completely broke, and I have the flash drive with his real bank statements. Meet me tonight." The name Vanessa instantly clicked into place inside my mental filing cabinet. As the chief executive officer of a financial forensics firm, I made it my business to know the structural hierarchy of every major corporate player in Atlanta, especially the firm that employed my husband. Vanessa was 26 years old. She was hired as a junior account manager exactly 8 months ago. It was not a coincidence that Malik had suddenly started booking excessive weekend corporate retreats right around the time she was onboarded. She was the subordinate. She was the pregnant woman he was planning to move into my house after throwing me and our daughter onto the street. I did not feel a single ounce of jealousy. Jealousy requires respect for the man who betrayed you, and I had absolutely zero respect left for Malik. All I felt was the cold, calculating thrill of a hunter watching her prey walk directly into a steel trap. I typed a swift, concise reply. I chose a multi-level parking structure in downtown Atlanta, a massive concrete building that was heavily monitored by cameras but entirely deserted on the upper levels after business hours. I gave her a time, 9 o'clock sharp. I told her to come alone and to make sure she was not followed. I finished my matcha latte, tossed the empty cup into a nearby trash can, and walked to my car. I drove back to Buckhead to check on Zuri. The house was blissfully quiet. My daughter was fast asleep in her nursery, watched over by our trusted nanny. I took a moment to stand in the doorway of her room, listening to her soft, steady breathing. Malik was willing to discard this beautiful, innocent child just to save his own corporate reputation. I promised myself right then and there that I would not just defeat him. I was going to dismantle him so completely that his name would become a cautionary tale in Atlanta high society for the next decade. I went to my master bedroom and changed out of my casual clothes. I put on a sharp black turtleneck, tailored slacks, and a dark wool trench coat. I needed to look like exactly what I was. A woman holding all the power. I grabbed my encrypted laptop, secured it inside my leather briefcase, and headed back out into the humid Georgia night. The drive downtown was smooth. The city lights blurred past my windows as I mentally reviewed my strategy with Mr. Harrison. We had the corporate audit ready. We had the divorce countersuit citing fraud and financial abuse filed with Ms. Sterling. The only missing piece of the puzzle was the exact offshore routing numbers Malik had used to hide the embezzled $500,000. If Vanessa actually had the original bank statements, the federal case against him would be absolutely bulletproof. I pulled my heavy sport utility vehicle into the downtown parking garage. The tires squeaked sharply against the polished concrete as I wound my way up the spiraling ramps. Level 1 was mostly empty. Level 2 and 3 were completely desolate. I reached the 4th floor and backed my car into a parking space directly facing the ramp. I kept the engine running, the headlights off, and the doors locked. The yellow glow of the sodium lights cast long, ominous shadows across the concrete pillars. I checked the dashboard clock, 8:55. Exactly 5 minutes later, the faint sound of an engine echoed up the concrete ramp. A modest, late-model gray sedan slowly crested the incline. The driver hesitated, scanning the empty level before spotting my dark vehicle parked in the shadows. The sedan pulled up about 20 feet away and shifted into park. The driver's side door opened. A young woman stepped out into the humid air. She pulled a tan trench coat tightly around her body, but it could not hide the visible swell of her pregnancy. She looked absolutely terrified. Her eyes darted toward the dark corners of the garage, jumping at the sound of distant traffic echoing from the streets below. I turned off my engine, unlocked the doors, and stepped out of my vehicle. My heels clicked with deliberate authority against the concrete floor as I closed the distance between us. Vanessa shrunk back slightly against her car door as I approached. Up close, I could see the dark circles under her eyes and the trembling of her hands. She looked nothing like the smug, triumphant mistress Malik probably promised she would be. She looked like a girl who had just realized she was standing on the deck of a sinking ship. "You came," Vanessa whispered, her voice barely carrying over the ambient noise of the city. "I did not think you would actually meet me." I stopped a few feet away from her, keeping my posture relaxed, but commanding. "You said you had his bank statements, Vanessa. I am not the kind of woman who walks away from hard evidence. Why are you handing it over to me?" She let out a shaky breath, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "He lied to me about everything. He told me he was leaving a toxic, abusive marriage. He told me you were a gold-digging freelancer who refused to sign the divorce papers because you wanted to drain his accounts. He promised me we were going to buy a penthouse in Sandy Springs before the baby arrived. He said he was independently wealthy." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "And what changed your mind today?" Vanessa swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "I stayed late at the office to finish a quarterly projection report. Malik left early to deal with a family emergency. He left his primary laptop open on his desk. I went into his office to drop off a file and I saw the screen. I saw the eviction notices from a blind property management company. I saw the aggressive legal threats from offshore compliance officers. I saw a zero balance in his personal checking account. He does not have anything. I is a complete fraud. She reached into her coat pocket with a trembling hand. When I realized he was broke, I panicked. I clicked on a hidden folder on his desktop. I saw the wire transfers. He was moving hundreds of thousands of dollars around using fake vendor names. I downloaded the core financial directory onto this drive and I ran. Vanessa held her hand out. Resting in her palm was a sleek silver flash drive. I took the drive from her, feeling the cool metal against my skin. I did not feel pity for her, but I did not feel anger either. She was just another pawn Malik had manipulated to feed his endless narcissism. He preyed on her ambition and her naivete. "You did the right thing, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of malice. "You need to pack a bag tonight. Leave the state for a few days and go stay with your family. Block his number on every single platform. When the federal authorities raid his office this week, you do not want to be anywhere near that building." She nodded frantically, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Are you going to destroy him?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I am going to erase him." Vanessa did not say another word. She practically dove back into her sedan, started the engine and sped down the parking ramp, the red taillights disappearing into the dark. I walked back to my vehicle and climbed into the driver's seat. I locked the doors and turned on the overhead dome light. I pulled my encrypted laptop from my briefcase, booted it up, and inserted the silver flash drive. The directory populated instantly on my screen. Malik had been incredibly sloppy. He kept everything in a hidden desktop folder labeled under a generic marketing budget code. I clicked through these files. Spreadsheets, wire transfer receipts, encrypted email logs with overseas bankers. I navigated directly to the Cayman Islands Offshore Trust. I found the original signature documents used to open the account. I just needed to verify the routing numbers to give Mr. Harrison the final nail for the federal audit. I opened the primary PDF of the account registry. I scrolled past the routing data, scanning the legal jargon. But as I reached the bottom of the document, my eyes locked onto the primary account holder information. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, reading the name over and over again to make sure I was not seeing things. The offshore account holding $500,000 of embezzled corporate funds was not in Malik's name. The signature on the bottom of the international banking agreement belonged to Vivian. I zoomed in on the signature line. Malik had perfectly forged his mother's distinct looping handwriting. He was intentionally channeling $500,000 of stolen money into an offshore account, bearing his mother's legal name and social security number. If the federal authorities ever audited his department, the paper trail would bypass him completely. He was going to claim Vivian opened the account independently and that he had absolutely no knowledge of the hidden funds. He was setting his own mother up to take the fall. He was willing to send the woman who raised him, the woman who loudly championed his arrogance and defended his every flaw, to federal prison for 20 years, just to save his own skin. I closed the laptop, the screen going black. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. A cold, absolute laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the quiet car. Malik thought he was a corporate mastermind. He thought he was untouchable. He had just handed me the match to burn his entire empire to ash, and I was going to make sure he watched it burn in front of the entire city. The first rays of the Atlanta sunrise were just piercing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ms. Sterling's penthouse office when I dropped the silver flash drive onto her polished mahogany desk. The heavy thud of the metal drive echoed in the quiet room. Ms. Sterling did not ask any questions. She simply picked it up, plugged it into her secure terminal, and opened the offshore banking registry I had flagged. I watched her dark eyes scan the digital paperwork. Emma Sterling was a woman who had spent 2 decades dismantling the most powerful corrupt men in Georgia family court, but even she let out a sharp breath when she saw the signature line. "He framed his own mother," Ms. Sterling said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "He funneled $500,000 of stolen corporate capital into a Cayman Islands account, and he used Vivian's social security number and forged her signature to do it. If the federal authorities raided his department today, they would bypass him completely and arrest a 62-year-old woman for international wire fraud." I sat back in the plush leather chair, crossing my legs. Malik is a survivor, I replied coldly. He knows Vivian is so obsessed with her high society image and her perfect son that she would probably take the fall just to protect his corporate reputation. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He thought he threw away a financially dependent housewife. He did not realize he handed a loaded gun to a forensic accountant. Emma Sterling reached for her desk phone. I am calling the federal prosecutor right now. We have the forged DNA test, the documented financial abuse, the eviction attempt, and now irrefutable proof of international embezzlement. We can have him in federal custody before lunchtime. I reached across the desk and gently pressed my hand over hers, stopping her from lifting the receiver. Not yet, I said softly. Emma Sterling narrowed her eyes, studying my face. Keisha, we have the kill shot. Why are we waiting? Because putting him in handcuffs right now only destroys his freedom, I explained, feeling a cold, absolute clarity settling over my mind. Malik does not value his freedom half as much as he values his professional pride. His entire identity, his ego, his justification for treating me and our daughter like disposable trash is entirely wrapped up in his title as a corporate vice president. If we arrest him now, he gets to play the victim. He will spin a narrative that he was under extreme personal stress. I do not want him to have a single shred of his ego left when the feds put those cuffs on him. I want to break him in the one place he thinks he is an absolute god. Emma Sterling slowly lowered her hand from the phone, a predatory smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. What exactly is the play? I pulled up a secondary file on my laptop and turned the screen toward her. Today is the most important day of Malik's entire career. He is pitching a massive high-stakes corporate merger to the executive board of his firm this morning. The deal has been in the pipeline for 8 months. If he closes this merger, his contract guarantees him a multi-million-dollar executive performance bonus. Emma Sterling nodded, instantly connecting the financial dots. And he plans to use that bonus to quietly replace the $500,000 he embezzled before the audit deadline this Friday. Exactly, I said. But there is a catch. In order to finalize the merger today, Malik has to prove to his board of directors that he has secured $50 million in backing from a silent venture capital firm. He has been sweating over this for weeks. He thinks he has the capital locked in. He thinks he is walking into that boardroom today to be crowned king of the company. And who is the silent venture capital firm? Ms. Sterling asked, leaning forward. I closed my laptop and stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored slacks. They operate under a blind trust called Vanguard Holdings. But the primary backing partner, the sole decision-maker, who has to approve the final release of those funds, is me. Emma Sterling actually laughed out loud, a rich, sharp sound of pure appreciation. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. Give him hell, Madam Chief Executive Officer. I will have the federal paperwork queued up and waiting for your signal. I left the law firm and drove straight back to my house in Buckhead. I needed to look like exactly what I was about to become, the architect of his total destruction. I bypassed the modest, unassuming clothes I wore to play the part of the struggling freelance bookkeeper. Instead, I reached into the very back of my closet and pulled out a custom-tailored emerald green power suit. I paired it with a crisp black silk blouse and genuine diamond stud earrings. I pulled my natural hair back into a flawless, severe crown. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at me was not a discarded wife. She was an apex predator. I gave Zuri a kiss on the forehead while she ate her breakfast with the nanny, then walked out the front door and slid into the back of a chauffeured black car I had ordered. The drive to downtown Atlanta took 20 minutes. We pulled up to the soaring glass and steel skyscraper that housed Malik's corporate headquarters. The building was a monument to wealth and exclusion, designed to make anyone without a 7-figure salary feel incredibly small. For 4 years, I had only ever entered this building through the side doors for awkward corporate holiday parties, playing the role of the quiet, supportive spouse, while Malik paraded around like he owned the city. Today, I walked straight through the main revolving doors. The lobby was bustling with executives' assistants and security personnel. I walked directly to the main security desk. A burly guard in a crisp uniform held up a hand, looking me up and down with a practiced, dismissive authority. "Excuse me, ma'am," the guard said, his tone dripping with routine boredom. "This is a secure corporate facility. All deliveries and unauthorized visitors need to be processed through the loading dock around back. I did not break my stride. I stopped right in front of his podium. I did not give him my name as Malik's wife. I did not explain that my husband worked upstairs. I simply reached into my designer handbag, pulled out a solid black metallic identification card, and slid it across the marble counter. The guard sighed, picking up the card to scan it. He glanced at the monitor. His eyes widened, realizing that the security system had just flagged my credential with the highest possible corporate clearance. Madam Chief Executive Officer. The guard stammered frantically, pushing the card back toward me with trembling fingers. I am so sorry. We were not informed that Apex Financial was conducting an on-site visit today. Please my apologies for the delay. He scrambled to grab a master access keycard from his drawer and handed it to me, bowing his head slightly. I took the badge without a word, maintaining absolute eye contact until he swallowed hard and looked away. I turned and walked toward the private executive elevators. I swiped the master keycard. The glass doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and hit the button for the 50th floor. The ascent was completely silent. The city of Atlanta dropped away beneath my feet through the glass walls of the elevator, the cars shrinking into tiny dots on the pavement. My pulse was steady. My breathing was calm. Every single insult, every microaggression from Vivian, every condescending remark from Chloe, and every manipulative lie Malik had ever spun was currently fueling a perfectly controlled fire in my chest. The elevator chimed. The doors glided open to reveal the executive floor. It smelled of expensive leather-rich espresso and the sharp metallic scent of corporate fear. The hallway was lined with thick plush carpets that absorbed the sound of my heels as I walked purposefully toward the grand corner suite. At the very end of the corridor stood a set of massive frosted glass doors leading into the primary boardroom. I stopped just 2 feet away. The doors were cracked open a fraction of an inch, likely left ajar by an assistant rushing to fetch coffee. I stood perfectly still, listening. Malik's voice echoed out into the hallway through the narrow gap. He was projecting his signature toxic arrogance, his tone smooth polished and utterly full of himself. He was currently pacing at the head of the long mahogany table commanding the room. I assure you, Chairman Malik was saying, his voice dripping with absolute certainty. The projections are completely bulletproof. We have mitigated all the risk factors on the Western expansion. And more importantly, you do not need to worry about the capital injection. I have personally been in direct contact with Vanguard Holdings. The venture capital funding is entirely secured. The $50 million is a lock. The future of this firm is sitting right here in my hands. I stood at the end of the sprawling mahogany table, allowing the sheer weight of the chairman's words to settle over the room. Malik sat slouched in his leather chair, his breathing shallow and rapid. His eyes darted from Chairman Thorne to me, his brain completely short-circuiting. The confident, arrogant vice president who had stood at the podium just 60 seconds ago was gone, replaced by a terrified man realizing he had built his entire life on top of a dormant volcano. I did not break eye contact with my husband as I spoke. Apex Financial has conducted a thorough review of the proposed merger. I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the boardroom. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. And we have concluded that the data presented here today is nothing more than a masterclass in corporate fiction. Malik gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning pure white. Keisha, stop this right now, he hissed through gritted teeth, desperation leaking into his voice. Chairman, you cannot possibly listen to her. She is a freelance bookkeeper. She does taxes for local bakeries. She has absolutely no idea what she is talking about. This is a personal vendetta. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout. I am the sole founder and managing partner of Apex Financial Forensics. I stated, turning my gaze to address the board directly. Vanguard Holdings is a subsidiary trust, operating under my direct corporate umbrella. I am the primary backing partner your vice president just claimed to have spoken with this morning. I can assure this board with absolute certainty that I have never authorized a $50 million capital injection for this acquisition. In fact, I rejected the preliminary proposal 3 weeks ago. A collective murmur rippled through the older executives. Several men leaned forward, their expressions hardening as they glared at Malik. The man they had trusted to lead their Western expansion had just been exposed as a blatant liar. Malik leaped out of his chair, panic completely overriding his professional survival instincts. "That is a lie." He pointed a shaking finger at me, sweat now openly dripping down the sides of his face. "She is lying to you. She is trying to sabotage my career because she is a bitter, jealous woman who cannot handle the fact that I am divorcing her for a younger woman. You have to call security. She is a fraud." Chairman Thorne slammed his open palm against the mahogany table. The loud smack silenced Malik instantly. "You are standing in my boardroom screaming at the chief executive officer of one of the most powerful financial intelligence firms in the southeastern United States." Thorne growled, his face flushing with anger. "I personally verified her corporate credentials with our legal department 30 minutes ago. The only fraud in this room, Malik, is you." I unclasped the sleek leather portfolio I carried under my arm. I pulled out a single perfectly printed sheet of paper. I walked down the length of the table, my heels clicking in the dead silence of the room, and slid the paper directly in front of Chairman Thorne. "You rejected my funding proposal," I continued, returning my attention to the board. "But you should be far more concerned with why your vice president was so desperate to secure it today." Chairman Thorne picked up the document. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the heavily redacted lines of financial data. The room waited in breathless anticipation. I watched the exact moment Thorne realized what he was looking at. The veins in his neck bulged. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. "What is this?" Malik whispered, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. "This," Chairman Thorne said, throwing the paper back onto the table with disgust, "is an internal forensic audit. It outlines exactly how you embezzled $500,000 from our operational budget over the last 8 months. It traces the stolen funds through dummy vendor accounts and straight into an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands." The boardroom erupted. Executives shouted in outrage, pushing their chairs back. Men who had been nodding along to Malik's presentation just moments ago were now looking at him like he was a diseased rat. Malik stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the projector screen. "No. No, that is doctored evidence. She fabricated that audit to frame me. I did not steal anything. The offshore account is not even in my name." He stopped speaking immediately, slapping a hand over his own mouth. In his sheer blind panic, he had just admitted out loud that he knew about the offshore account. He had just confessed in front of a dozen witnesses. I smiled, a slow, freezing curve of my lips. "You are right, Malik. The account is not in your name. You forged your mother's signature on the international banking agreements. You set Vivian up to take the fall for your federal crimes. And the best part is, you left the digital footprint of the forgery right on your primary work laptop. The laptop you carelessly left unlocked at the office, allowing your pregnant subordinate to download your entire financial directory." Malik let out a strangled, animalistic sound. He lunged toward me, his hands reaching out, abandoning all pretense of sanity. He never made it past the second chair. Two broad-shouldered corporate security guards, who had quietly slipped into the room during the commotion, grabbed Malik by the arms. They slammed him back against the wall, pinning his shoulders. Malik thrashed against their grip, his expensive suit tearing at the seam. "You are finished at this firm?" Chairman Thorne roared over the chaos, pointing a finger directly at Malik's face. "You are terminated effectively immediately. Security, drag him down to the lobby and throw him out on the street. I am forwarding this audit to the federal authorities before lunch." Malik fought against the guards as they dragged him toward the heavy glass doors. His polished loafers scrambled against the hardwood floor. He twisted his neck to look at me, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and filled with a maniacal rage. "You think this is over, Keisha?" Malik screamed, his voice tearing through the corridor as the guards hauled him backward. "You think you can destroy my life and walk away? I am going to ruin you. The charity gala is this Saturday. Every major society blogger and financial backer in Atlanta will be there. I will stand on that stage and tell everyone the truth about you. I will drag your name through the mud until you have nothing left." I stood at the head of the boardroom table, entirely unbothered by his screaming. I smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from my emerald green blazer. "I will see you on Saturday, Malik," I said softly to the empty doorway. The heavy frosted glass doors swung shut, cutting off the sounds of his pathetic, struggling departure. The boardroom was completely silent again. Chairman Thorne let out a heavy sigh, running a hand over his face, before turning to me with a look of profound apology. "Madam CEO Thorne," said, his voice returning to a steady, respectful rumble, "I cannot begin to express my apologies for the gross negligence this firm has displayed by employing that man. I assure you we will cooperate fully with your forensic teams to untangle this mess." I nodded graciously, picking up my leather portfolio. "I have already instructed my legal department to share all necessary offshore routing data with your internal compliance officers. You will have everything you need to assist the federal prosecutors." I turned and walked toward the exit. I pressed the button for the private elevator, watching the numbers tick down. Malik wanted a war at the High Society Charity Gala. He wanted to use his mother's elite connections to publicly humiliate me. He wanted to burn my reputation to the ground in front of the entire city. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, watching my reflection in the polished, mirrored walls. Malik had absolutely no idea that I was not just going to attend his precious charity gala. I was the keynote sponsor, and I was bringing the Federal Bureau of Investigation as my +1. The heavy silence in the boardroom was absolute. 15 male executives sat frozen in their high-backed leather chairs, their eyes darting between Malik and me. Malik looked as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. His mouth hung slightly open, and a bead of sweat formed at his temple, rolling slowly down the side of his face. He had spent his entire career relying on his smooth-talking charm, wrapping his superiors around his finger with perfectly rehearsed presentations and empty promises. But charm could not save him from hard data. I stepped fully into the room, the click of my heels breaking the silence. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of a woman who owned every square inch of the ground she stood on. I bypassed the empty seats and walked directly to the head of the long mahogany table, positioning myself right beside the chairman. I turned to face the board, my posture impeccable in my tailored emerald suit. I did not look at my husband. He was no longer a threat. I was simply a discrepancy on a spreadsheet waiting to be erased. The chairman steepled his fingers, waiting for my assessment. I placed my hands flat on the polished wood of the table and leaned forward slightly. Apex Financial has conducted a comprehensive forensic review of the proposed Western expansion. I began, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional inflection. I did not raise my voice because true power does not need to shout. I looked directly at the senior partners. "And we have concluded that the data presented to you today by your vice president is a complete fabrication. It is not just overly optimistic. It is an intentional, calculated misrepresentation of corporate assets." A low murmur rippled down the table. Men in expensive suits shifted uncomfortably, exchanging worried glances. "Let us look at the projected revenue for the third quarter." I continued, pointing to the glowing projector screen behind Malik. "Your vice president claims a 40% growth margin based on newly acquired vendor contracts in the Midwest region. Those contracts do not exist." My team ran a trace on the primary vendor identification numbers listed in his proposal. They are shell companies registered to vacant lots in Nevada. He is using ghost accounts to inflate the operational revenue, creating a paper trail of income that will evaporate the second you attempt to liquidate. Malik gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. "Keisha, shut your mouth!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a panicked, venomous whisper. I ignored him completely. I shifted my gaze to the chief financial officer sitting on my left. Furthermore, the risk assessment report completely omits the hidden liabilities tied to the commercial real estate acquisitions. The properties he wants you to purchase are drowning in municipal tax liens and environmental compliance fines. He buried those penalties in subsidiary holding companies to keep them off your primary ledger. If Vanguard Holdings injected $50 million into this merger today, your firm would absorb over $12 million in hidden debt by tomorrow morning. He is not building an expansion. He is building a financial sinkhole. Malik snapped. The polished corporate executive persona shattered into a million pieces. He slammed both of his hands down onto the mahogany table, the loud smack echoing through the room like a gunshot. "She is lying," Malik yelled, his voice cracking as he pointed a trembling finger at me. He looked wildly around the room, trying to make eye contact with the men who had been nodding along to his pitch just 5 minutes ago. Do not listen to a single word she says. She is a bitter, vindictive woman. She is my wife, and we are going through a highly contentious divorce. She found out that I am leaving her for a younger woman, a woman who is actually carrying my child, and she is having a total mental breakdown. He paced a tight circle near the projector, pulling at his expensive silk tie, loosening it as if he were choking. He turned back to the chairman, his eyes wide and frantic. She stole corporate credentials. She is an unhinged, emotional wreck trying to sabotage my career because she is jealous. You have to call security and have her removed immediately. She belongs in a psychiatric ward, not a boardroom. I stood perfectly still, letting his pathetic, misogynistic tirade hang in the cold air of the room. He was trying to weaponize my gender, hoping these older corporate men would dismiss me as an angry, scorned wife. But he forgot one crucial detail. These men worshipped money above everything else, and I was the woman holding the key to their $50 million vault. I slowly reached into the sleek leather portfolio I had carried under my arm. I did not justify his insults with a response. I pulled out a single neatly folded piece of white paper. I did not look at Malik. I turned my body and placed the document directly in front of the chairman. You rejected the Western expansion proposal weeks ago, I said, addressing the chairman with absolute professional calm. But you should be far more concerned with why your vice president was so desperate to secure that venture capital funding today. You should ask yourself why he needed a massive executive performance bonus processed before the end of the fiscal quarter. The chairman picked up the document. He pushed his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose. The boardroom held its collective breath. I watched the chairman's eyes scan the lines of heavy black text. I watched his brow furrow. I watched the exact second the realization hit him. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him pale before a deep, furious red crept up his neck and flooded his cheeks. The paper in his hands began to tremble. What is this? Malik asked, his voice shrinking into a high, weak pitch. He took a hesitant step forward. Chairman, whatever she gave you, it is a forgery. I swear to you it is fake. The chairman slowly looked up from the paper. His eyes locked onto Malik with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet, a low rumble that promised absolute destruction. This is an internal forensic audit generated by Apex Financial, the chairman said, tossing the paper back onto the table like it was covered in disease. It details exactly how you embezzled $500,000 from our operational marketing budget over the last 8 months. It traces every single stolen dollar through fake vendor accounts and directly into an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. The boardroom exploded. 15 senior executives shouted all at once. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as men stood up in outrage. The men who had mentored Malik, the men who had golfed with him and invited him to their homes, were now looking at him like he was a thief who had crawled out of a sewer. No, Malik gasped, stumbling backward until his spine hit the glass wall of the conference room. No, that is doctored evidence. She fabricated that audit to frame me. I did not steal a single dime from this firm. The offshore account is not even in my name. He clamped his mouth shut instantly, his eyes bulging. The room went dead silent again. In his sheer blind panic, he had just confessed. He had just admitted out loud in a room full of furious corporate executives that he knew about the offshore account. He had just verified the audit with his own words. I offered him a slow, freezing smile. You are right, Malik. The account is not in your name. You forged your mother's signature on the international banking agreements. You set Vivian up to take the fall for your federal crimes. You left the digital footprint of the forgery right on your primary work laptop. The laptop you carelessly left unlocked at the office, allowing your pregnant subordinate to download your entire financial directory and hand it directly to me in a parking garage last night. Malik let out a strangled, animalistic sound. He lunged away from the glass wall, his hands reaching out, abandoning all pretense of sanity. He wanted to physically tear me apart. He never made it past the second chair. The chairman slammed his fist onto the intercom button embedded in the mahogany table. Security. Executive boardroom, immediately. Before Malik could take another step toward me, the heavy frosted glass doors burst open. Two broad-shouldered corporate security guards rushed into the room. They grabbed Malik by the arms, slamming him back against the doorframe, pinning his shoulders tight. Malik thrashed violently against their grip. The seam of his custom-tailored suit jacket ripped with a loud tear. He kicked his polished loafers against the hardwood floor, struggling like a caught animal. "You are finished at this firm," the chairman roared, standing up and pointing a trembling finger directly at Malik's face. "You are terminated effectively immediately. Security, drag him down to the lobby and throw him out on the street. Do not let him touch his desk. Do not let him speak to anyone. I am forwarding this forensic audit to the federal authorities before lunch." The guards hauled Malik backward into the carpeted hallway. He fought them every inch of the way. His pristine image was completely destroyed. His tie was askew, his shirt was pulled out of his trousers, and sweat poured down his face. He twisted his neck to look back into the boardroom, his bloodshot eyes locking onto mine with a manic, obsessive rage. "You think this is over?" Keisha Malik screamed, his voice tearing through the quiet, luxurious corporate corridor as the guards dragged him toward the elevators. "You think you can destroy my life and walk away? I am going to ruin you." The charity gala is this Saturday. Every major society blogger and financial backer in Atlanta will be there. I am going to stand on that stage and tell everyone the truth about you. I will drag your name through the mud until you have absolutely nothing left. I stood at the head of the boardroom table, completely unbothered by his screaming. I smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from my emerald green blazer. I looked out into the hallway, my expression perfectly serene. "I will see you on Saturday, Malik," I said softly. The heavy glass doors swung shut, sealing the boardroom and cutting off the sounds of his pathetic, struggling departure. The room was perfectly quiet. I turned to face the chairman, offering him a polite, professional nod. Malik wanted a war at the High Society Charity Gala. He wanted to use his mother's elite connections to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire city. I smiled inwardly, knowing he had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him. That gala was exactly where I wanted him. The annual charity gala, hosted by the firm, was the undisputed crown jewel of Atlanta high society. Inside the opulent grand ballroom of the historic downtown theater, towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over a sea of custom tuxedos and designer evening gowns. The room was packed with the city elite, from megachurch pastors to city council members and venture capitalists. Vivian had positioned herself perfectly near the center ice sculpture, holding a glass of imported champagne like a royal scepter. She was wearing a deep plum evening gown, performing her absolute favorite role as the deeply wounded but resilient matriarch of an upstanding family. Chloe stood right beside her, sipping a martini and nodding sympathetically as Vivian spun her toxic web of lies to a tight circle of wealthy investors and prominent society bloggers. I knew exactly what they were doing, because my private security detail had already intercepted the whispers circulating the room. Vivian was telling anyone who would listen that I had suffered a total psychological collapse. She leaned in close to the wife of a prominent judge, lowering her voice in feigned sorrow, claiming that Malik had caught me funneling his hard-earned money to a secret lover. She told them I had violently attacked her son when confronted with the truth. Chloe eagerly chimed in, using her practiced breathy therapy voice to express how tragic it was that I had allowed my unhealed trauma to destroy a beautiful marriage. They were actively painting me as a destitute, unhinged, dangerous woman who had been rightfully thrown out onto the streets of Buckhead. They were laying the groundwork for Malik to play the tragic, honorable executive holding his family together through a horrific personal crisis. They had absolutely no idea that while they were sipping champagne and assassinating my character, I was standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the penthouse suite of a luxury hotel, slipping into a custom liquid gold backless gown that screamed absolute untouchable power. For 4 years, I had dressed down to make Malik feel big. I wore muted colors and sensible shoes to play the part of the unassuming freelance bookkeeper. Tonight, I did not dress to blend in. I dressed to be the undeniable center of gravity. My hair was styled in a sleek, high architectural crown, pulling the focus directly to the diamond drop earrings that grazed my jawline. My encrypted phone vibrated on the marble vanity. I answered on the first ring. It was Ms. Sterling. Her voice cut through the line with surgical, ruthless precision. She confirmed that the federal warrants were officially signed by the magistrate judge an hour ago. The divorce countersuit heavily detailing Malik's financial abuse, extortion, and fraudulent medical documents was locked into the court registry and sealed by the clerk. The offshore banking evidence, complete with Vivian's forged signature, had been successfully handed over to the federal authorities. Ms. Sterling told me the trap was completely spring-loaded. The federal agents were staged in unmarked vehicles 3 blocks away from the venue, waiting for my exact signal to move in. I thanked her, grabbed my sleek metallic clutch, and walked out the door. The humid Atlanta night air wrapped around me as I stepped out of the private elevator and into the waiting, chauffeured black Maybach. The drive to the venue was a quiet, meditative glide through the neon-lit streets of the city. I watched the bustling crowds through the heavily tinted windows, my heart beating with a steady, methodical rhythm. I was not walking into a party. I was walking onto a battlefield, and I was holding all the ammunition. The Maybach pulled smoothly up to the velvet ropes lining the red carpet entrance. A uniformed valet rushed forward and opened my door. I stepped out into the humid air, the high slit of my gold gown revealing a pair of razor-sharp stiletto heels. The reaction from the perimeter was instantaneous. The paparazzi, local journalists, and society photographers, who usually scrambled to capture the old money elite, immediately turned their massive camera lenses toward me. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding rapid-fire strobe lighting up the street. They recognized me, but not as Malik's quiet background wife. They recognized the aura of a striking, commanding presence, demanding their absolute attention. Whispers ripped through the crowd of arriving guests and media personnel. People who had just been scrolling through the toxic rumors Vivian planted online stared at me in total shock. I did not look broken. I did not look destitute or unhinged. I looked like I owned the entire building and everyone inside it. A local society blogger shoved a microphone in my direction, shouting over the flashes to ask if the rumors of my eviction were true. I did not answer her. I simply offered a cool, devastating smile that silenced her instantly. I glided up the carpeted steps with perfect, unhurried grace, ignoring the chaotic noise of the street. I reached the landing just outside the main glass doors of the grand ballroom. Through the polished glass, the sea of elegantly dressed guests parted slightly, creating a direct line of sight to the VIP section near the main stage. Vivian was standing there mid-sentence, her champagne glass raised as she captivated a group of wealthy donors. Something must have shifted in the atmosphere of the room because she turned her head toward the grand entrance. Our eyes locked across the distance. I watched the smug, aristocratic smile slide right off her face like wet clay. Her expression contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The sheer audacity of my presence, dressed in liquid gold and commanding the attention of every photographer in the lobby, completely shattered her carefully constructed narrative of the broken, impoverished ex-wife. The color rushed violently to her cheeks, turning her face a deep, mottled red. She slammed her crystal glass down onto a passing waiter's tray, nearly shattering it. She frantically flagged down the burly head of event security standing near the stage. I watched her point a trembling, furious finger directly at the glass doors, barking orders to the men in earpieces. She was demanding they intercept me and physically throw me out into the street before my heel even touched the ballroom floor. The security guards nodded, their faces hardening as they turned their massive frames toward the entrance and began marching quickly in my direction. I did not retreat. I did not break eye contact with Vivian. I simply smiled, tilted my chin up, and stepped forward to meet them. The flashbulbs from the paparazzi created a blinding wall of white light as I stood at the threshold of the grand ballroom. Vivian was moving toward me with the speed and ferocity of a woman who felt her absolute authority slipping away. She pushed past a group of high-profile real estate developers, not even bothering to excuse herself. The heavy gold fabric of my custom gown brushed against the polished marble floor as I waited for her. I did not take a single step backward. 2 massive event security guards were flanking her, their hands resting on their radios, ready to drag me out into the humid Atlanta night. Vivian stopped just 3 feet in front of me. Her chest heaved. The society bloggers who had been documenting the red carpet arrivals instantly turned their microphones and cameras toward us, sensing the impending high society slaughter. Vivian wanted a public execution. She wanted to humiliate me so thoroughly that I would never dare show my face in her city again. She wanted the wealthy elite of Atlanta to watch the low-level bookkeeper get thrown into the gutter. "How dare you show your face here, you penniless fraud!" Vivian hissed. Her voice was loud enough for the press to hear every single word. "Security will be removing you immediately. Did you really think you could rent a dress crash my family gala and beg Malik to take you back? You are a delusional broke woman who belongs in a psychiatric ward." Officers grab her arms. "Get this trash out of my sight before she ruins this charity event." The head of security, a towering man with a thick neck and a serious scowl, stepped forward. He reached out his massive hand, hovering just inches from my bare shoulder, preparing to physically spin me around and march me down the red carpet. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend myself against Vivian's pathetic insults. I simply unclasped my metallic clutch. The snap of the metal closure echoed sharply. I reached inside and pulled out a heavy matte black lanyard. Attached to the end of the silk ribbon was a solid titanium identification card embossed with the event logo in gleaming gold foil. I did not hand it to Vivian. I held it up directly in front of the head of security. The guard stopped dead in his tracks. He squinted his eyes, scanning the raised lettering on the titanium card. The color drained from his face with staggering speed. He recognized exactly what he was looking at. This was not a standard guest pass. This was not even a standard VIP table ticket. It was the exclusive platinum title sponsor credential. It was a badge that indicated the person holding it had single-handedly underwritten the entire multi-million-dollar charity gala. The security guard immediately dropped his hands to his sides. He took a swift, highly disciplined step backward, clearing the path completely. He lowered his head in a deep, respectful bow. "My apologies, Madam Sponsor," the guard said, his voice carrying a distinct tremor of panic. "We were not informed you had arrived. Please write this way. Let me know if you require a personal escort to the main stage." Vivian let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. Her jaw dropped so hard it practically unhinged. She stared at the bowing security guard, then at the heavy titanium badge resting in my manicured hand. The absolute cognitive dissonance short-circuited her brain. She looked like she was trying to process a foreign language. The society bloggers surrounding us furiously typed on their phones, capturing the exact moment the powerful matriarch was publicly dressed down by a security guard. "What are you doing?" Vivian screeched, slapping the security guard's thick shoulder. "Do not bow to her. She is a fake. That badge is stolen. I demand you throw her out right now. She is a hostile intruder." The head of security straightened up and looked at Vivian with cold professional detachment. "Ma'am, if you harass the primary benefactor of this event again, I will be forced to remove you from the premises. Please step aside." I offered Vivian a slow, freezing smile. I did not say a single word to her. I did not need to. Her total loss of power was written all over her sweating, flushed face. I stepped past her sputtering, paralyzed form and walked straight through the heavy glass doors into the main ballroom. The atmosphere inside was electric. A 12-piece jazz band was playing smoothly in the corner. Hundreds of Atlanta's wealthiest power brokers were seated at round tables draped in black silk. The clinking of crystal and the hum of privileged conversation filled the massive space. But as I walked down the center aisle, a sweeping wave of silence began to follow me like a physical current. I did not stop at the guest tables. I did not stop at the designated family VIP section where Chloe was currently sitting. I saw Chloe from the corner of my eye, her jaw hitting the table as she watched me glide past her. She frantically grabbed her phone, likely trying to text Terrence, unaware that Terrence was already sitting on the other side of the room, preparing to end their marriage. I kept my chin perfectly level, my posture commanding absolute authority. Every head in the room turned. The heavy silk of my gold gown flowed behind me like liquid fire. I was a disruption to their carefully curated world, an anomaly they could not ignore. The men and women who had spent the last hour whispering toxic rumors about my psychological breakdown were now staring at me in total bewilderment. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a conqueror walking through conquered territory. I walked directly toward the front of the ballroom, heading straight for the illuminated main stage. The event director, a frantic-looking woman holding a glowing tablet, saw me approaching the stairs. She looked down at her digital seating chart, then up at my titanium badge, and immediately signaled the audiovisual team in the elevated control booth. I placed my stiletto on the first carpeted step. I walked up the short staircase and stepped squarely onto the center of the vast polished stage. The event director waved her hand. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing mid-note. The ambient house lights dimmed significantly, plunging the dining tables into deep shadows. A single blindingly bright spotlight snapped on from the ceiling, tracking my movement and hitting me dead center. The massive ballroom went completely terrifyingly silent. The sudden quiet was so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. Hundreds of faces stared up at me from the darkness. The elite of the city held their collective breath, waiting to see what the mysterious platinum sponsor was about to do. I slowly turned my head, scanning the audience until I found exactly who I was looking for. Malik was standing near the glowing amber lights of the premium open bar at the far end of the room. He was holding a tall, slender flute of champagne. I knew exactly why he was standing there. He had been fired from his lucrative corporate vice president position that very morning. He had been humiliated, dragged out of a boardroom by security, and exposed as a thief. But Malik was a man addicted to optics. He came to this gala tonight to network, to shake hands, and to spin a web of lies to his financial backers before the federal authorities could leak the news of his embezzlement. He was desperately trying to save his sinking ship. The bright spotlight caught the panic exploding in his eyes. He realized in a fraction of a second that the woman standing on the main stage of his prestigious charity event was not the destitute, discarded wife he thought he left to freeze in an empty house. He realized that the woman holding the microphone was the chief executive officer who had orchestrated his complete professional slaughter just hours ago. Malik opened his hand. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering into hundreds of glittering pieces. The sharp crash of breaking glass echoed violently in the dead silent ballroom. I looked down at the microphone resting on the sleek acrylic podium in front of me. I reached out with a steady hand. I tapped the metal grill twice. The sharp, resonant thud amplified through the massive surround sound speakers, commanding the undivided attention of every single person in the room. The sharp, resonant thud amplified through the massive surround sound speakers, cracking through the grand ballroom like thunder. The low hum of privileged conversation died instantly. Hundreds of faces turned toward the main stage, their expressions shifting from polite curiosity to profound shock. These were the power brokers of Atlanta. These were the exact same people who just 10 minutes ago had eagerly swallowed Vivian's toxic whispers about my supposed mental breakdown. They expected to look up and see a broken, humiliated woman being escorted out by security. Instead, they were looking at a titan in command of the room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice projected smooth, resonant, and entirely unbothered through the state-of-the-art sound system. Welcome to the annual charity gala. My name is Keisha. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Forensics, and it is my profound honor to be your platinum title sponsor for the evening. I paused, letting the heavy weight of my introduction settle over the room. Out in the audience, I saw Vivian gripping the edge of a cocktail table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. I purchased the underwriting rights to this magnificent event because my entire career is built on a single uncompromising principle: transparency. In my line of work, we expose hidden liabilities. We uncover the truth buried beneath thick layers of corporate deceit. Tonight, I decided it was time to bring that transparency into the light and expose a few massive liabilities of my own. I gave a subtle, practiced nod to the audio-visual director sitting in the elevated glass control booth at the back of the hall. Instantly, the heavy velvet curtains behind me parted with a mechanical hum. The massive 50-foot digital screens flared to life, illuminating the entire ballroom in a stark, clinical white glow that completely washed out the warm chandelier lighting. On the left side of the screen, a high-definition image of a medical document appeared. It was a court-ordered, federally verified DNA test. I had rushed the expedited results through a premier Atlanta laboratory just 48 hours ago. The bold black text at the very bottom of the projection read, 99.9% probability of paternity. It explicitly, undeniably named Malik as the biological father of my 1-year-old daughter Zuri. A collective audible gasp swept through the room. I let the murmurs rise, letting the absolute truth sink into the minds of the elite crowd before I spoke again. That document is the truth, I declared, raising my hand to point at the glowing screen. That is the biological reality of a beautiful, innocent baby girl who deserves a father that protects her. Instead, she got a coward. I gave another nod to the control booth. On the right side of the massive screen, a second document materialized, sitting side by side with the real one for ultimate visual contrast. It was the crumpled, pathetic piece of paper Malik had thrown onto my glass coffee table. The disgraced clinic logo sat in the top left corner. The fake red stamp glared brightly. The forged signature of a doctor currently serving time in a federal penitentiary was magnified to 10 feet tall for everyone to see. This, I said, my voice dropping to a temperature of absolute ice, is the lie my husband tried to sell me exactly 4 days ago. He stood in my living room backed by his mother Vivian and handed me a fraudulent medical document. He looked me dead in the eye and denied his own flesh and blood. He tried to throw me and his infant daughter out onto the street, claiming I was a cheat and a low-level freelance bookkeeper. I scanned the crowd, watching the high society guests physically recoil in disgust. The prominent Judge Vivian had been gossiping with just moments ago, clamped a hand over her mouth in sheer horror, stepping entirely away from Vivian as if she were diseased. You might ask yourself why a successful corporate vice president would commit criminal forgery to disown his own child. I continued pacing slowly and deliberately across the wide stage. The answer, as my forensic team always finds, is money. Malik needed a fault-based divorce to trigger an ironclad prenuptial agreement. He needed to strip me of every marital asset we owned to generate rapid, untraceable liquidity. I extended my arm, pointing directly at the back of the room. He needed to liquidate my assets because he was facing a looming corporate audit. Malik embezzled $500,000 from his own firm. He funneled it through dummy vendor invoices and directly into a Cayman Islands offshore account. He planned to leave his baby daughter homeless just to cover his tracks and secure a multi-million-dollar executive bonus. The spotlight operator, sensing the climax of the drama, swung a secondary beam of harsh white light directly onto the back bar. The light hit Malik, trapping him like a panicked animal. He was frozen in place, his polished shoes surrounded by the shattered remains of his dropped champagne flute. The wealthy investors and corporate executives standing next to him immediately took several large steps backward, parting like the Red Sea to leave him entirely isolated in the glaring light. The social assassination was absolute and breathtaking. The grand ballroom erupted into chaotic chatter. The scandal was far too delicious, too horrifying for the elite crowd to ignore. Malik opened his mouth, shaking his head, his hands raised as if he could physically push the accusations away. But he had absolutely zero power here. His pristine reputation was disintegrating into ash right before his eyes. Suddenly, a loud, frantic screech sliced through the noise of the ballroom. "Stop this immediately. Turn off those screens right now." I looked down near the front row of VIP tables. Chloe was sprinting toward the stage. She was practically tripping over the heavy hem of her expensive designer gown, her face twisted in a mask of performative outrage and sheer panic. She could not stand the narrative shifting away from her control. More importantly, she realized that the financial forensics I was exposing could easily swing in her direction next. She threw herself against the side of the stage, grabbing wildly at the thick black audio cables taped to the floorboards. She began frantically tugging at them, desperately trying to yank them out of the junction box to cut power to my microphone. "You are ruining a safe space for the community," Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, weaponizing her tears for the wealthy donors watching her. "This is a charity event. We are here to support vulnerable populations. You are displaying aggressive, hostile behavior. You are traumatizing everyone in this room with your toxic drama. Somebody stop her." She was playing the ultimate white savior victim card, trying to paint me as the loud, angry villain destroying a polite society gathering. It was a pathetic, transparent display. Two heavily built event security guards immediately rushed forward, reaching down to pull her off the stage wiring. I held up my hand, signaling the guards to stand down. I did not need security to handle Chloe. I had brought my own heavy artillery. I walked to the very edge of the stage, looking down at my sister-in-law as she desperately tugged at a cable that was firmly bolted into the heavy stage floor. Her face was streaked with running mascara, her chest heaving with manufactured sobs. "Since we are clearing the air tonight, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting cleanly and effortlessly through her fake hysterical crying, "let us talk about your specific brand of charity." I looked up at the audio-visual booth and gave one final decisive nod. The massive digital screens behind me shifted instantly. The dual DNA tests vanished. In their place, high-definition images of Bank of America, wire transfer receipts, illuminated the room, casting a bright blue glow over the shocked audience. The font was blown up to massive proportions. The documents clearly highlighted Chloe's legal name as the sole authorized sender. The source account was explicitly listed as Terrence's private generational trust fund. The destination routing numbers pointed directly to offshore holdings registered in Ohio, specifically earmarked for her brother's multiple legal defense settlements. The blue glow of the massive digital screens washed over the grand ballroom, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the faces of the Atlanta elite. I stood at the edge of the stage and watched the exact moment the truth shattered Terrence's reality. He was sitting dead center in the front row VIP section. His eyes were locked on the 50-foot projection of the Bank of America wire transfers. He was reading the routing numbers, tracking the systematic draining of his private generational trust fund. This was money his grandfather had bled to build during the civil rights era, wealth meant to secure their family lineage. And there it was on screen, funneled offshore to pay off a white man's vehicular manslaughter and drunk driving settlements in Ohio. Chloe realized she was entirely exposed. She let go of the thick black audio cables she had been frantically trying to rip from the stage floor. She turned around, her face completely devoid of color, and looked at her husband. "Terrence, baby." Chloe gasped, her voice shrill and desperate as she scrambled down the short stage stairs. The heel of her stiletto caught the hem of her expensive designer gown, tearing the silk, but she did not care. She rushed toward his table, holding her hands out in a placating, pleading gesture. "Please, you have to listen to me. This is a total misunderstanding. I was just trying to protect my family from a crisis. I was going to pay it all back. We can go to couples counseling. We can heal from this trauma together." She reached out to grab his tuxedo sleeve, weaponizing her tears, hoping her usual routine of playing the fragile, overwhelmed victim would save her. Terrence did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. He simply looked down at the hand she had placed on his arm, and then he looked up into her tear-streaked face with an expression of absolute freezing disgust. "You stole my grandfather's legacy to keep your reckless brother out of a federal penitentiary," Terrence said, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried clearly to the edge of the stage. "You stood in my brother's living room yesterday and lectured my sister-in-law about generational trauma, all while you were actively looting my family's wealth. Do not ever touch me again." Terrence smoothly pulled his arm away from her grasp. He reached over with his right hand and gripped the heavy platinum wedding band on his left ring finger. He slid the ring off in one swift motion. He dropped it directly onto the glass centerpiece of the VIP table. The heavy metal clinked sharply against the crystal, ringing out like a final, undeniable death knell for their marriage. Terrence turned his back on her, adjusted his tuxedo jacket, and walked straight out the side exit of the ballroom without looking back a single time. Chloe let out a devastated, dramatic wail and collapsed onto the carpeted floor. She buried her face in her hands, waiting for someone, anyone, to rush forward and comfort her. But the wealthy donors and society bloggers surrounding her simply took a collective step back, pulling their designer gowns away from her as if her mere presence was contagious. Her white savior complex had completely imploded, leaving her isolated and financially ruined on the ballroom floor. I did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. I adjusted my posture, turning my attention back to the center of the room. The spotlight shifted, cutting through the shadows to find Malik. He had watched his brother walk. He had watched his sister-in-law collapse. He realized that his entire defensive perimeter had just been vaporized. There was no one left to deflect the blame onto. The crowd of corporate executives and elite investors who had worshipped him an hour ago were now staring at him with undisguised revulsion. Malik snapped. The last remaining thread of his sanity and his polished corporate facade completely snapped. He shoved a passing waiter out of his way, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. He charged down the center aisle of the ballroom, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He was no longer trying to play the composed victim. He was a desperate, cornered predator acting on blind instinct. "You vindictive, ungrateful witch!" Malik screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice tearing through the ambient acoustics of the hall. He pointed a shaking finger at me as he stomped aggressively toward the stage. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my city. You think you are untouchable because you have some secret bank accounts. You are nothing. You hear me. You are a ghetto public school nobody who got lucky." He marched past the silent, staring crowds, completely ignoring the cell phone cameras, recording his spectacular meltdown. "I gave you everything," Malik roared, spittle flying from his lips as he reached the base of the stage. "I gave you my last name. I gave you access to this lifestyle. Without my family, without my mother's connections, you are absolutely nothing. You do not belong in this room. I am going to destroy your life. I am going to drag you through the courts until you are begging me for pocket change. I will ruin you." I stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at the man I had married 4 years ago. I did not step back. I did not show a single flicker of fear. I held the microphone to my lips and smiled a cold, devastating curve that held absolutely zero mercy. "You did not give me a name, Malik," I replied, my voice projecting smooth and commanding over the speakers. "You gave me a liability, and I am currently liquidating it. As for ruining my life, you are going to find it very difficult to file lawsuits from a federal holding cell." Malik let out a feral shout of anger. He grabbed the polished brass railing of the stage stairs, preparing to physically charge up the steps and rip the microphone from my hands. He never made it to the first step. A deafening crash echoed from the very back of the grand ballroom. The massive, heavy mahogany doors were violently shoved open, hitting the decorative drywall with a sound like a bomb detonating. The sheer force of the entrance completely silenced Malik's screaming. He froze his hand, still gripping the brass rail, and whipped his head around to look over his shoulder. The entire ballroom gasped. The society bloggers lowered their phones. The band members on the side of the stage stood up from their stools. It was not the private event security team. It was not the local Atlanta Police Department. A perfectly synchronized line of men and women marched straight through the entrance and down the center aisle. They were not dressed in black tie attire. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with bold, stark yellow lettering printed across their backs and chests. They moved with a terrifying absolute authority that parted the sea of wealthy guests instantly. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived. The heavy ballroom doors at the back of the hall did not just open, they were shoved apart with a violent, synchronized force that sent a shockwave through the room. The men and women who marched down the center aisle were not wearing tuxedos or evening gowns. They were dressed in dark tactical windbreakers with stark yellow lettering printed across their chests and backs. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived. They moved with a terrifying, absolute authority that caused the sea of wealthy guests to part, instantly clearing a direct path straight to the main stage. I stood perfectly still, watching the tactical team ascend the stairs. 2 lead agents flanked Malik, boxing him in completely. Malik froze, his hands trembling as he looked at the federal badges flashing under the ballroom lights. The lead agent did not lower his voice. He pulled a thick stack of folded warrants from his jacket and began reading the charges aloud for every prominent socialite, investor, and journalist in Atlanta to hear. Corporate fraud, international wire fraud, criminal forgery, and embezzlement. As the agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt, the last remaining shred of Malik's corporate bravado completely evaporated. He did not fight back. He did not stand tall. He physically crumbled. Malik dropped to his knees on the polished stage floor, the fabric of his expensive tuxedo pants tearing. He began to weep, loud, pathetic, heaving sobs that echoed through the microphone I still held in my hand. He looked out into the crowd of horrified onlookers and screamed for the only person he had ever relied on to clean up his messes. He cried out for his mother, begging Vivian to call their lawyers, begging her to make the federal agents go away, reverting instantly to the spoiled, entitled child she had raised him to be. Vivian could not stand the public humiliation of her golden child. She shoved her way through the paralyzed crowd, her face a mask of frantic, indignant rage. She rushed to the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at the lead federal agent. She demanded that they unhand her son immediately. She began screaming about her social standing, her connections to the mayor, and her untouchable status within the Atlanta elite. She threatened to have every single agent fired for daring to interrupt her family's charity gala. A second federal agent calmly detached himself from the group on the stage and walked down the short flight of stairs to meet her. He did not look intimidated by her plum evening gown or her imported pearls. He simply reached into his tactical vest, pulled out a sealed subpoena, and handed it directly to her. Vivian snatched the document, her eyes scanning the bold legal print. The agent informed her in a clear, carrying voice that she was being formally subpoenaed in connection with a Cayman Islands offshore account registered under her legal name and social security number. He stated that $500,000 of stolen corporate capital had been routed into an account bearing her forged signature. I watched from the stage as the horrible, devastating reality finally clicked inside Vivian's brain. She looked from the federal document in her trembling hands up to the face of her weeping son on the stage. She realized in front of the entire city that her perfect, untouchable boy had deliberately set her up to take the fall for his federal crimes. He had used her as a human shield to save his own skin. The psychological weight of the betrayal hit her like a freight train. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her a ghostly, unnatural gray. Her eyes rolled back, her knees buckled, and she stumbled backward. She crashed directly into a catering table draped in black silk. Dozens of tall crystal champagne flutes shattered onto the marble floor as Vivian collapsed into the wreckage, her expensive gowns soaking up the spilled alcohol. Not a single person rushed forward to help her. The elite society friends she had been gossiping with just 20 minutes ago physically recoiled. The judges, pastors, and wealthy donors took several large collective steps away from her unconscious body, treating her like she was suddenly radioactive. Her social empire was reduced to shards of broken glass in a matter of seconds. The month that followed was a masterclass in swift, merciless legal execution. The criminal and family court proceedings moved with blinding speed, fueled by the flawless mountain of forensic evidence my firm had compiled. Ms. Sterling, my divorce attorney, dismantled Malik's defense team so thoroughly it barely qualified as a trial. Because Malik had submitted a forged medical document to trigger a fault-based divorce, the family court judge was absolutely furious. The judge viewed his attempt to legally disown his own daughter to hide his financial crimes as one of the most reprehensible acts he had ever presided over. I was awarded full sole legal and physical custody of Zuri. Malik was stripped of all parental rights. But the true poetic justice came from the very prenuptial agreement Malik had forced me to sign 4 years ago. He had demanded an ironclad fault clause, assuming he would use it to leave me destitute. Because the court ruled that Malik was entirely at fault for the dissolution of the marriage through criminal fraud and financial abuse, the clause was triggered in reverse. I was awarded 100% of the marital assets. I seized his luxury cars, the remaining equity in his corporate investments, and every single cent he had to his name. He was left with absolutely nothing. The federal criminal court was even less forgiving. Standing before the judge in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he used to wear, Malik was sentenced to a lengthy term in a federal penitentiary. There were no corporate bailouts. There were no elite connections coming to save him. He was a convicted felon, stripped of his title, his wealth, and his pride. Chloe faced her own distinct brand of ruin. Terrence had immediately filed for divorce and pursued aggressive civil litigation to recover his stolen inheritance. Chloe was entirely cut off from the generational wealth she felt so entitled to. Her designer bags and luxury vehicles were repossessed to satisfy the court judgments. The woman who had tried to weaponize her fake allyship to force me into a homeless shelter was now living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, working minimum wage shifts to pay off her brother's legal debts. I was sitting in my corner office at Apex Financial Forensics, the afternoon sun casting a warm golden glow over the Atlanta skyline outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. The polished mahogany desk in front of me was clear, save for a sleek leather-bound folder containing the final signatures for a new multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition my firm had just secured. The business was expanding rapidly, thriving in the clear air of my newfound freedom. The quiet hum of the office was interrupted by the sharp ring of my private unlisted phone line. Very few people had this number. I set my pen down and pressed the speaker button. I did not say a word. I simply listened to the heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Keisha, a voice croaked. It was Vivian. But she sounded completely unrecognizable. The haughty, elitist transatlantic accent she had spent decades perfecting was entirely gone. Her voice was thin, fragile, and utterly broken. "Please do not hang up," Vivian begged, her words rushing out in a frantic, desperate plea. "The federal authorities have frozen all my remaining accounts, pending the investigation into the offshore trusts. The bank is moving forward with the foreclosure on my estate this Friday. The defense attorneys are demanding a massive retainer to file an appeal for Malik's sentencing, and I have absolutely nothing left. We are going to lose everything. You have the marital assets. You have your company. You are a wealthy woman. Please, I am begging you as a mother. I just need a loan to keep the house and pay the lawyers. We are family. You have to find it in your heart to forgive us." I leaned back in my plush leather chair, resting my hands on the armrests. I looked out over the sprawling city, letting the silence stretch across the phone line. I let it hang there for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I wanted her to feel the crushing, suffocating weight of the silence. I wanted her to remember the exact way she had treated me when she thought I was powerless. I leaned forward, positioning my mouth near the microphone. "I am sorry, Vivian," I said, my voice smooth, cold, and dripping with absolute, unapologetic satisfaction. "I am just a freelance bookkeeper. I do not have that kind of money lying around." I reached out and pressed the disconnect button, cutting off her sudden, hysterical sobbing. I opened my security settings and permanently blocked the number. I stood up from my desk and walked across the spacious office toward the plush, cream-colored rug near the windows. Zuri was sitting there, bathed in the afternoon sunlight, happily stacking a set of wooden building blocks. She looked up at me and offered a bright, joyful smile, her eyes completely free of the toxic shadows that had once threatened our home. I knelt down on the rug and scooped my daughter into my arms, holding her close to my chest. I stood back up and looked out through the massive glass windows at the vibrant, bustling city below. The empire I had built in secret was now standing proudly in the light. The toxic, manipulative family that had tried to tear me down had completely destroyed themselves. We were safe. We were untouchable. We were finally free. The most profound lesson to take away from this ordeal is that true power never has to shout. When confronted with devastating betrayal by the very people who took a vow to protect you, your ultimate shield is your independence. Society often conditions women to shrink themselves to accommodate fragile egos and to fit neatly into the toxic narratives that manipulative family members construct. We are told to carry the burden, keep the peace, and accept the role of the scapegoat, hoping our loyalty will eventually be rewarded with basic respect. But respect cannot be negotiated with individuals who are deeply committed to misunderstanding you. When my ex-husband and his mother attempted to discard me and my daughter, they banked entirely on my silence. They calculated that my perceived financial and emotional dependency would make me an easy, disposable target. They were wrong. Silent strategic preparation is your greatest weapon. Financial autonomy is not simply about accumulating wealth, it is about acquiring options. It is the absolute freedom to walk out of a burning room and never look back. You do not owe your loyalty or your peace of mind to a family that weaponizes your vulnerabilities. Marriage certificates and shared bloodlines are not infinite passes for abuse. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is simply standing your ground, holding your boundaries, and letting the sheer arrogance of toxic people orchestrate their own spectacular downfall. You never have to fight for a seat at a table where you are disrespected. You can simply buy the building and evict the disrespect entirely. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and rebuild your life after a betrayal from those closest to you? Share your personal journey of resilience in the comments below. If this story of reclaiming your power resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a firm reminder that their peace is always worth fighting for.